So you guys, Rick Steves, we're thrilled to have you here. We do have Steve Crandall, who's today's day chair, introducing Rick, but I hope you don't feel badly, Rick, but Steve Crandall chose to go see Heart perform in Vancouver and is not here with us today. So absolutely no reflection. I think he committed that way back. So Ginny, we've got a video with Steve introducing Rick Steves today.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. Sorry I can't be there in person today, but I wanted to still take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker today, Rick Steves. Guidebook author and TV host Rick Steves is America's most respected authority on European travel. Rick took his first trip to Europe in 1969, visiting piano factories with his father, who was a piano importer. As an 18-year-old, Rick traveled to Europe on his own, funding his trips by teaching piano lessons. In 1976, he started his business, Rick Steves Travel, which has grown from a one-man operation to a company with a staff of 100 full-time, well-traveled employees in his headquarters in Washington State. There, he produces more than 50 guidebooks on European travel, America's most popular travel series on public television, a weekly, hour-long national public radio show, a weekly syndicated column, and free travel information available through his travel center and ricksteves.com. Rick Steves Europe also runs a successful European tour program. Rick Steves lives and works in his hometown of Edmonds, Washington. His office window overlooks his old junior high school. I also want to say I had the great opportunity and privilege to take a Rick Steves tour to Eastern Europe for 16 days a year ago this last summer. And I have to tell you that everything that Rick will tell you about his travel tours and about traveling really is true. It was a life-changing experience. The friendships that I made, I continue to have today. And I can't wait for my next Rick Steves tour. With that, fellow Rotarians, it is my great honor to introduce Rick Steves.
Thank you very much, Steve, wherever you are. You know, it's... Thank you very much, Steve. When Steve called me up and asked me if I could join you today, we talked about what I might talk about, and there were so many things I wanted to talk about, and he said, talk about it all. So I've got 40 minutes, and bear with me, but I've just buckle your seatbelts. I want to talk about safety and terrorism and refugees. I want to talk about drug policy. I want to talk about Iran. I want to talk about the Holy Land, and I want to talk about Cuba. And I'm just going to dabble in all of these things, okay? But I'm just, my work is teaching Americans to travel, giving them confidence. And it occurs to me these days there is so much fear in our society. When I started traveling, people said, bon voyage. And now they say, have a safe trip. Now, I know the statistics, and I feel like responding, have a safe stay at home, okay? Because it's safer over there than it is here. And if you really care about safety, the most important thing we can do is travel and better understand the other 96% of humanity. So that's become part of my mission, is to get out there. And, a lot of you know, I think I was talking with John here, who took my class back in 1975 at the University of Washington. I've been doing the same thing ever since I was a kid. And as Steve mentioned, I've got 100 great people that work with me up in Edmonds. Part of the thing that distinguishes a good trip is to have experiences. So many people are doing bucket shop travel now, and it's not just a bunch of famous sites. You got to meet people. If I'm making a TV show, leading a tour, writing a guidebook, having my own vacation, the quality of that trip is determined by how many real people do I meet, not how many cliches do I see on stage, but how many real people do I sit down and talk with, We put a bunch of newsletters on your table. There's just like 5 per table. You're welcome to grab them, but it's 64 pages of my favorite experiences in Europe. And the idea is that's what carbonates your experience. So if you got a trip coming up, be sure to grab one of those newsletters. I didn't want to flood the place with them, but there's there, and if we run out, there's more out in the hallway. Also, while I'm talking about what's on your table, we produced this with KCTS, this wonderful look at the Holy Land. I'm so thankful to work with public television because we can deal with hard, complicated issues and we get both narratives, acknowledging that we don't really understand the whole thing, but we got to talk to people on both sides of a wall in hopes that their kids can get together, you see. And we've produced this Holy Land show. I'll be talking about that a little later. But I put a bunch of Holy Land, a couple of them on each table, and there were just some extras I had. And if you want to take it home and watch it, you can figure out an equitable way to share 2 of them with 10 people at your table. But I hope there's none of these left when we clean up after this lunch, okay? So those are just yours. And for more information, I love when I go on a trip to make a journal and just spread it around. This is my experience in the Holy Land, and we've got about 50 of them out in the hallway if anybody's curious about that. And all of that stuff you can get on our website streaming and so on if you miss it here. But I've been teaching for 30 years. At first it was European Travel Cheap. That's what I called my class when John took it. It was just how to backpack through Europe. Then in the 90s, I started really getting excited about understanding the history and the art, and that was really exciting for me. And then after 9/11, it realized the real challenge for us is to get out of our comfort zone and hang out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. We don't need to become them, we don't need to agree with them, but we can learn about their perspective, and that's what I call travel as a political act. When we travel that way, we bring home what I think is the greatest souvenir, and that's a broader perspective, and a mindset where we're more likely to build bridges and less likely to build walls. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next half hour or so. First of all, you can imagine employing 100 people here and 100 guides in Europe. For 30 years, I've been kind of tuned into what are people nervous about? What's the anxiety? Terrorism, volcanoes, all sorts of problems that people get nervous about, refugees and so on. One thing I've found in my travels is that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world, okay? And that's sort of a fascinating sort of underpinning of a lot of these travels. We go around the world, we leave the comfort of our home to hang out with people and understand what is their baggage, what are their fears, what is dangerous for them. And I really feel like it's important for Americans to have a grip on the difference between fear and risk. And lately, we've lost a grip on that, you know. A lot of people think of the importance of terrorism and personal and national safety in the electorate right now. We've lost 20 people since 9/11 overseas to terrorists. 20 people in 15 years. Frankly, that's nothing. We lost that many people last week, very avoidably, in each state in this country, if we really wanted to, think about those kind of issues. But a lot of Americans are afraid to go to Europe. A lot of Americans think they got to hide that they're Americans and so on. And there's this terrorism issue. The main thing I want to talk about is to remind people that media has morphed from news into entertainment masquerading as news in the last generation. When Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, I really think to the best of their ability that's the way it was. Because back then, commercial networks willingly gave the news hour to our public without intending to make a profit on it. They lost money when they paid Walter Cronkite his wage. Today, they can't do that. Corporations have to profit maximize in the short term, and they've decided we've got to make money on the news. So whoever is most bombastic and exciting to watch gets the coverage because it sells more ads. And that rewires our way of assessing options, and it certainly rewires our way of looking at the world. I like entertaining news, but I don't want it to rewire my mind and make me a fearful person. I've thought a lot about fear lately, and it just seems to me fear is for people who don't get out very much. And the flip side of fear is understanding, and we gain understanding through travel. So in a few minutes, I'm going to take you on a little trip to what I call the axis of opportunity. 3 places that are supposed to be enemies, but maybe not, and we can learn those people. But please don't let terrorism keep you home. Statistically, it's not a big deal. Europeans laugh out loud when they hear that Americans stay home for safety reasons. If you really understood the statistics, you'd take your family to Europe tomorrow. This is how I sell tours. I go to Chicago and Detroit and Florida, and people ask me, is it safe over there? My goodness. Of course it's safe over there. Get out of your dangerous city if you really are motivated only by what's safe. The other issue these days is refugees. And that's a reasonable concern, but we took 20,000 people on 900 tours last year, and every year I fly in my European guides, and we have a week-long workshop in Edmonds to share notes and everything. Last month we had 100 guides in our office up in Edmonds, and they led 900 tours through Greece, Turkey, Poland, Russia, everywhere, you name it in Europe, we did them. And I just told them, Americans are anxious about refugees. What is the real impact of refugees for a tourist in Europe? And they said, nothing. They did tours right through the whole thing. And logically, there's no reason anybody should consider refugees when you're thinking of going to Europe. There's no, at worst, you'd be held up at a border for an hour while they're taking care of some sort of a bottleneck and they have to take care of these desperate people. Now, so there's no risk. There is the remote possibility of a little bit of inconvenience. And I think that's a blessing because you have to sit there and realize there are people who have different problems than ours. Half of this world is trying to live on $2 a day, and we're the ones with the economic crisis. It's just nice to go overseas and think about that a little bit. And there is this related issue that a lot of Americans go, yeah, I know it's not dangerous, but I don't think it's polite to be vacationing on this Greek island when there's all that desperation on the next island. It's just rude, so I'm gonna go to Cancun and ignore them instead. If you're gonna ignore them, you're gonna ignore them. So that's not a moral issue. I would say if you're gonna ignore them, do it in Greece, where you can contribute to the economy that's actually being dragged down by the burden of feeding and housing these people. Please don't let refugees get in the way of your travel dreams to Europe. It makes no sense at all. How do I transition from that into legislating morality, drug reform policy, and legalizing marijuana? America is fascinating in our insistence on legislating morality. It's very interesting. My European friends tell me that's folly. It's not right. They say a society has to make a choice, tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always remind me, you Americans lock up about 10 times as many people per capita as we do over here in Europe. Either you are inherently more criminal people or you've got some screwy laws. Now, in Europe, they have this sort of notion of pragmatic harm reduction. And bless Nancy Reagan's heart, we've got just say no. We've got simplistic moralization, you see. And it's just two different mindsets. In Europe, they analyze the problem. They realize it's not going to go away. We could make prostitution a capital punishment, and there's still going to be it. Let's just take the crime and the violence and the pimps out of it. Let's make sure that these sex workers are organized, taxed, regulated. They can't be in business without checking with a doctor to get their license so they're not spreading diseases. Let's organize it so when she has a dangerous client, she pushes her emergency button and she's not rescued by a pimp, but she's rescued by a policeman. That's the notion. It's called pragmatic harm reduction. There's not more of it there than here. It's just in the open there. And it doesn't have the crime and the violence considered into it. So these are challenging topics for us Americans to grapple with. I don't pretend there's any easy answers. They don't get it completely right, and we don't get it completely wrong. But my job as a thoughtful tour guide and travel writer is to let Americans get out of their surroundings and hang out with different people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. It's just challenging, it's stimulating, and it's certainly an interesting tourist attraction when you are in Frankfurt or Hamburg or Amsterdam. I was in Switzerland recently. I went down to the toilet from a nice restaurant and I stepped into the bathroom, the men's room, and blue lights. Blue lights. And then I remembered, oh yeah, blue lights. I cannot see my veins. I couldn't shoot up if I wanted to. And I realized, if you're a restaurateur in Europe, you've got a lot of needle addicts in the streets, and you don't want them hanging out in your restroom because all these nice people are going to be uncomfortable when they have to go to the bathroom. It's not that they have more needle addicts. A lot of my tourists go, these darn liberal Europeans, look at all these drug addicts. They got the same as we do, 1%. We had 1% before 1971 when Nixon declared the war on drugs. We got 1% now, $1 trillion later. And Europe has 1% with a whole different approach to it. It's just a persistent 1% that messed up in hard drug abuse. The difference is you see them in Europe because they're still alive and they're not in jail. We lose twice as many people to heroin overdoses here than they do there per capita. And we have the same amount of people messed up with hard drug addiction. Different approaches. So what they've got is blue lights so people don't shoot up in public, Across the street, you've got a machine that used to be selling cigarettes. Now it's rejiggered and it sells syringes, almost free. I didn't notice this, but when you go to Switzerland, look at all the cigarette machines. They're not selling cigarettes. They're helping their needle addicts. And down the street where the tourists don't go, you've got an ugly scene, which is a very compassionate place. And this is called a Cafe Fix, a heroin maintenance clinic funded by the government. We'd have a tough time doing that because it kind of endorses that terrible activity. They have no problem doing that at all because it's compassionate. In Europe, the word for addiction in many countries is the same as enslaved. These people are enslaved to drug addiction. They don't need cops and judges and lawyers. They need counselors and nurses and support and a little bit of love. That's just a different approach, okay? And as Americans, it's fun to go over there and just to talk to people about how you deal with a persistent problem with pragmatic harm reduction instead of idealistic moralization. But they take the crime and the violence out of it, and they think of people as sick and try to get them up and at them. A big issue that maybe you know I've been into is the war on marijuana. Marijuana is the way I say it, the prohibition of our age. And we in Washington State were quite amazing or quite groundbreaking in actually legalizing marijuana. For 25 years in the Netherlands, a joint has been as exciting as a can of beer. They just can't imagine locking somebody up for wanting to smoke marijuana with discretion and mature, style. And in the Netherlands, they've never figured out the backside. They call that the gray area. They just turn a blind eye to the wholesaling and the distribution, and it's legal to sell it, you see. In our state, you can't sell it in a lounge kind of way like a coffee shop, but we have legalized, taxed, and regulated it now. And I was one of the funders and co-sponsors and spokespeople for this law 4 years ago, along with the federal prosecutor John McKay, along with Pete Holmes, along with a lot of president of the Bar Association of Washington, lots of real wasted heads, drug addicts. No, these are just people. None of us smoked pot. We were all not pro-pot. We are pro-civil liberties, pro-smart law, anti-racism, pragmatic harm reduction. Let's stop empowering gangs and organized crime, and let's take that huge industry that rivals apples as the biggest cash crop in Washington State, and let's tax the heck out of it and regulate it. Saving all that law enforcement money, taking all that financial power away from crime, and netting tens of millions of dollars a year for Olympia to have programs on health and drug programs. I talked to Jay Inslee a couple months ago. We had lunch, and he doesn't have to arrest 8,000 people a year that he had to arrested before. He's got to able to redivide his attention. I want to stress, because a lot of people take this out of context, it's not pro-pot. It's smart law. That's what John McKay said when he sat on panels with me. It's so interesting to deal with this. And my hunch from the start has been, there's not a whole reservoir of decent people that would love to ruin their life smoking pot if only it was legal. A lot of people talk that way, but people who want to smoke pot do. It's just rich white guys don't get arrested. Poor people and black people do. That's the reality. It's the new Jim Crow. That's really what it is. A lot of people say, well, it's a gateway drug. Marijuana's not that bad. I used to smoke it myself. But you smoke it now, it's really strong, and you're going to be a heroin addict. Europeans have learned that the only thing gateway about marijuana is when it's illegal, you got to buy it from a criminal on the street who's got a vested interest in selling you something more addictive and much more profitable. That's how it's a gateway. There are so many pragmatic, smart reasons to legalize, tax, and regulate this drug. It's a drug, it's not healthy for you, but it needs to be treated smartly. So that's what Washington State has done. My hunch was use would not go up, teen use would not go up, DUIs would not go up, crime would not go up. We didn't know. That was my hunch from other countries' track records. 4 years later, all of those are accurate. All of those are accurate. Oregon legalized 2 years ago. I'll be working in California, Massachusetts, and Maine this October as they plan to legalize this November. But you're going to hear a lot of talk about it, and I just love to give people that different angle that is not pro-pot, but smart law, pragmatic harm reduction. Okay, let's go traveling. I want to go to Iran. I wanted to go to Iran, and people ask me, why were you going to Iran? And I thought, I'm going to Iran because I think it's good style to know people before you bomb them. I'm not a pacifist. Sometimes you got to bomb people, but it should hurt. And I also want to understand what's their baggage. I know what our baggage is, 9/11. We do all sorts of things because of 9/11. That's really not true to us, but we do it because we have to, because we've been threatened, you see. And I wanted to go to Iran and learn about that. And thank goodness there is one media source that can bring you hard-hitting, interesting information that needs to be talked about, regardless of how it might offend advertisers. And you know what I'm getting at. It's a pledge drive, okay? It's just public television. And I work for public television, so we could go over there and we could do an hour show in Iran and bring it home. And all over the country, people who thought we were just being a Jane Fonda mouthpiece of the enemy, said they were taking public television out of their wills, but public television wouldn't be extorted, and we produced these shows, and I'm so proud of that and thankful for that. I was afraid at first. We almost left our big camera in Athens, thinking on the streets of Tehran they'd be throwing stones at us. And thank goodness I had the nerve to bring our big camera in, because I've never been so warmly received on the streets of any place I've worked with my crew as when I was in Tehran. I mean, it's a big city, 12 million people, traffic jams all the time. Big, do you see the big poster there, the angry anti-American propaganda? 8 stories tall American flag with the stripes made out of dropping bombs and the stars made out of skulls. It says, "Down with America." Walking below that on the sidewalk, awkward. Just, hi, howdy. But I remember the people I met in the streets weren't even born when that was painted, and with their government, you can't change it. It's certainly not a democracy, it's a dictatorship and a theocracy. But friendly people. We were stuck in a traffic jam. I'll never forget, it was just silent, and we're stuck in the traffic jam. And the man in the next car went like this. My driver rolled down his window, and the man in the next car passed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigner in your back seat and apologize for our traffic." I thought that never happens on I-5. It's never happened. It wouldn't happen on I-5. Later on, we were in another traffic jam. It was silent, and suddenly the driver just blurted out. He said, "Death to traffic." And I said, "Wait a minute. I thought it was death to America or death to Israel." And he said, "No, right now, it's death to traffic." And I said, "Well, what is with that anyways?" And he said, "Well, here in Iran, when something's frustrating us and out of our control, we say death to that." He doesn't speak English very well. He's translating in a very stilted, simple way. And I thought, you know what he's saying? Damn the traffic. That's how you translate damn into English, death to. We could go to war over this, death to America, We need to have a more sophisticated understanding of this stuff before we send in the troops. It is so interesting. What's his baggage? What does he really mean? Have I ever thought, damn somebody, damn those teenagers? Of course I have. Now, do I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? Not yet. But it's after midnight, turn down the music. Damn those teenagers. Death to teenagers, okay? So we need to understand that a little bit. And when you travel in Iran, by the way, anybody here could travel in Iran quite easily, like going to the Soviet Union in the old days. You just gotta have a ground operator over there that figures out your transportation and your hotels, and you have to have a guide. They don't want individuals from the United States rattling around over there getting in trouble, and I don't blame them, frankly. We were able to film and have a wonderful time over there. Powerful, complicated, confusing land of 70 million people with a proud heritage, and they're not living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Now, what motivates them? It's not the price of oil. It is incursions from the West. We've got 9/11. 15 years ago, we lost 2,800 people on 9/11, and we've never been the same. 25 years ago, they lost 200,000 people on the border of Iraq. 200,000 with 1/4 of our population. That's a little bit of grounds for baggage. Who invaded them? Saddam Hussein, funded by the United States of America. Now, maybe you don't believe that. Doesn't really matter. That's what they think. That's their baggage. And every town, every Mukilteo, every Mount Vernon, every Bellingham has a vast martyrs cemetery. And you go there, and you see widows sitting on their tombs the tombs of their husband, as they have every Friday for 25 years, wailing. That's baggage. And then when we say, regime change, bomb, 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 Iran, what does that do to them? They were worried about another Shah on the throne. For a generation, they had the Shah on the throne, put on their throne because Mossadegh nationalized their oil. You can't do that. The Shah was friendly to American oil interests and British oil interests. Again, it's not a matter of the oil interest in Israel and stuff. It's the who is voting for Ahmadinejad. People really upset that in Tehran they're bragging that the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they are in Paris. That's what scares the people, is this Western incursions, and I could talk a lot about it. I've got a 1-hour talk about this, by the way, on my website if you wanted to check that out, my own experience. But I met the people, and that's what is so valuable about traveling. On my last day, a woman came across the street to me, a well-dressed English-speaking woman. She said, "Are you an American journalist?" And I said, "Yeah." And she did one of these things. She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're united, we're strong, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." I said, "We got something in common here." Now, what was the deal? She was afraid that if we had a regime change, which is very likely, I mean, look what happened in Iraq. If we had a regime change, the new authority would turn her little girl into a boy toy, a crass materialist, and a drug addict. And if you watched Miley Cyrus videos today and you were a mother in Iran, you'd have the same fear. So, I don't want to apologize for them, but I wanted to know who would vote for these guys, these Ahmadinejad type guys in this big society, this important society. They're the same people that would vote for somebody like that in our beautiful country. Small town, less educated, fundamentalists. Think about it. Small town, less educated, fundamentalists. Good people rattled by fear and motivated by love. That's what we're dealing with. And when we travel and when we smart each other up, we meet each other, we humanize each other, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to demonize us, and it makes it tougher for our propaganda to demonize them. And to me, that's a real valuable thing. With the same spirit, thank you. With the same spirit of our trip to Iran, so I got 15 minutes left. I'm never going to make it. It's so much fun to talk to you guys. I'm going to have to really blitz this. I'm awfully sorry, but I want to get to Cuba. But we went to Israel in the Holy Land, and I'm just committed to the notion that if you go to Israel, you've got to get both narratives. It's not pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, it's just what is the truth? There's 12 million people here, 6 million Jews, 6 million Muslims, 4 million people in Palestine, 8 million people in Israel. 2 million of the 8 million people in Israel are Muslims, and it's a short, small little area. You can get around it in minutes. You talk to good Jews, you talk to good Muslims, and you understand the story and the consequences and the terrorism and the attempts to make things work and the failure and the big wall, and then you realize the pride of this wonderful opportunity for Israelis to have their own country, and you also cross the border and you realize Palestinians aspire to have their own country as well. You stand on the Golan Heights and you look down at the Sea of Galilee and you hear from an Israeli the importance of them holding the high ground, and then you see the incursions of all the settlements in Palestine, and you talk to the people in the settlements. You see how they're little Californias with walls around them, and you get their perspective, and then you cross that wall. You have guides on both sides. This is my Palestinian guide and my Israeli guide, and that's what you need to do. You go into Palestine realizing that you could, if you wanted to, you could bicycle from where people believe Jesus was born to where he was crucified in half an hour. Bethlehem to Jerusalem. But there's a wall there, and the people can't cross it except unless you're a tourist. If you're a tourist, you cross it like you're going to Tijuana to San Diego, and it's about the same economic difference. So, you can cross over. And I'm not going to be able to go through all of this because I want to get to Cuba, but I do want to remind you that KCTS runs our Holy Land show, and if you like, you can see it on your computer anytime if you go to ricksteves.com. And it's a fascinating part of the world. You can do any Christian going to the Holy Land needs to spend time in Palestine. It's not dangerous, it's just poor. It feels dangerous, it's just poor. There's 10 times the economic difference, and you see the importance of land. And you see from a Palestinian perspective how things are getting smaller and smaller and more cut up with fancy infrastructure, and people are just contained in their cities. And this is all talked about in the newsletter that I was mentioning. But it's a fascinating struggle. This is in Hebron. The tomb of Hebron is a very tense city. And this is the mosque and the synagogue that shares the tomb of Abraham, the common ancestor. There is bulletproof glass on the tomb so people can worship as Muslims on one side of the tomb and as Jews on the other side of the tomb. And you just kind of go there and you guys got to figure this out. I'm so inspired by how Ireland has figured things out, and there is an opportunity for the Holy Land to work it out, but it's going to be complicated. Again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to blitz. This is the biggest refugee camp. Balata. It's got the same platting as when there was tents there, but now these are 8-story tall cinder block buildings. Wonderful opportunity to go in and meet these people. Ramallah is the big city, and you can go to the university there and talk to well-educated Palestinians about their perspective and get a little sense of what's going on there. We talk about that. As a matter of fact, if you do pick up this Holy Land DVD on your table, there's 2 hours of interviews, including 15 minutes with some of the girls at the university there. And just to talk to local people on both sides of that wall, to me, is a beautiful opportunity. That's what travel's all about. Okay, shalom, y'all. So I'm going to just quickly go through Cuba. And basically, Cuba is open to American travelers now. You can go perfectly legal on a tour down there, an educational tour, or you can go arguably legal by flying through Canada or Mexico. That's what I did over New Year's. And what you got to do is, and the government is completely aware of this. People do it by the thousands. You can't imagine. It's the number one Caribbean destination for Germans and Canadians, and it's becoming huge for Americans also. They don't have the infrastructure to support this. But you can, and our government, there's drop downs when you get a bed and breakfast or buy your plane ticket, even if you're doing it through Canada or Britain like I did. And our government says, do you have a general license? And you say, yes. What are the 12 categories? You got to choose one. And then just remember which one you chose. Religion, visiting family, education, professional research. I did professional research. I would think everybody in this room could find an excuse to call it professional research. It's self-policing. Many people were fined tens of thousands of dollars during the Bush years. During the Obama years, nobody's been fined. I came back after this trip, very upfront, came to the customs guy in Houston, and he said, boom, and I said, I was in Cuba. I've got souvenirs, cigars. Do you want a cigar? He said, welcome home. You know, it's very doable. I've got a 30-part Facebook series at Rick Steves on Facebook with videos and all this information. If you just go back a couple weeks on my Facebook page, I'm fascinated by how many people are interested in Cuba and the United States. It is very exciting to travel there. I'll be giving a talk at Town Hall on March 27th, about an hour-and-a-half talk on this, and it costs $5. And then I'm giving the same talk for free in Edmonds, at the Center of the Arts in Edmonds, along with a bunch of other that's our travel festival. But the 7 in the evening talk, the capper of the day, is a free talk I'm giving on Cuba. And if you want the details, you know, even the best guidebook doesn't know right now what's going on. I was just there, so I'm happy to share that information. I hired a guide, that was Ray, $100 a day. We were there for 10 days, the first 4 days with Ray, $100 a day. The local income is $50 a month. He was making $100 a day. He worked really hard for us. And we had a great time with that local guide. Havana, oh man, it's just so exciting to see with its 500-year history, with its amazing classic cars, with its sort of dolled-up old town where tourists are very comfortable, with its modern art, and with its gentle characters on the street posing with big cigars. In Cuba, there are white people, mixed people, and black people. And I say that because we have the color of our eyes on our driver's license, you know, and on their documents it just says, what race are you? And there's 3, black, mixed, or white. And it's interesting to talk to people who stayed there. Our perspective is pretty much from people who left when Fidel came, so we know the anti-Fidel people because Florida is our window to Cuba. But the darker people and the poorer people who stayed there, they have a different take. It's complicated, it's not right or wrong. As a capitalist and a good businessman, I was really frustrated by how things just don't work there and there's no incentive to work. On the other hand, it was a very gentle people, and I'll tell you, a lot of Americans judge Cuba comparing it to our economy. That's not right. You got to judge it compared to Honduras and Guatemala and Nicaragua, and then you'll see there's the same downtrodden masses and so on. It's just, in Cuba, they have a certain dignity. They're educated, they've got health care, and it's safe. I was scared to death to walk around in Managua in San Salvador a couple of years ago. I was out at midnight in the barrios in Havana, felt safe as can be. So it's a very perplexing, complicated place to go. Fidel is, he's essentially gone. And it's just your opportunity to go there and talk to people. It's just the Soviet embassies towering above everything, long gone now. People living in these ramshackle houses 2 blocks away from the Capitol building. The American embassy, newly opened. Art galleries selling photos, or art that says, incredible photo with Obama and Raul together in the photo, with our president going there next month. I didn't feel any military or police presence, but it was certainly there. It was just low-key, because nobody can demonstrate against the government because it's not a free country, it's a communist dictatorship. The only anti-American stuff I saw was anti-embargo. That was the thing that you saw posters for. You didn't see any advertising. You just saw signs where it's just like the Soviet Union in the old days. You've still got, this is a committee for the defense of the revolution. You go into a supermarket, and if you want some meat, I hope you like sausage. I mean, it's just, there's no selection. If you want good Cuban food, go to Florida, all right? But a highlight for me was just being there and connecting with the people and the cars. I'm not into great old classic cars, but in Cuba, wow. Every time I got into a car, the guy would say, 1955. And I would say, me too. It's just, it's so nice to be in this car. Okay, so I am, let me just see, we've got, I believe, sorry, I'm just remembering our time situation. I want to just make sure I've got 5 minutes for Q&A. So walking down the streets, the people you meet, and the friendliness. Doors are open, you meet school kids. These guys were guarding their school. We bought them a beer and they took us on a tour at midnight. Not much money. I mean, that's a pretty sad classroom there. But adorable young people with their school outfits, more and more people getting online, and just a fascinating opportunity. It's got that tourism overlay, so you can stay in fancy hotels if you want to. You can go to the Tropicana, the Great Caribbean Cabaret. My son really enjoyed that. You can't use your credit card because of the embargo, so you got to bring cash. And then you just bring your dollars and you change into local Cuban pesos. There's parallel currencies, one the tourists and the rich people use, and the other, which is the popular pesos. I never had any reason to use the popular pesos. It's easy to change money. It's essentially 1-to-1, and they nick us for 10% as what I consider an embargo tax. And but it's still very reasonable to get around. Again, the food is, you don't go there for the food. That's just it. But a great place to stay is in people's homes, bed and breakfast. And you book that through Airbnb. And this was just a beautiful house that we lived in with a maid for, $30 a night per person. And, you need to be able to put your feet through the footboard. But the fondest memories of us were sitting on the rooftop with the man who owned it, talking politics. It's just very accessible, and it's a beautiful, beautiful opportunity. All right. Yeah, I think I'm going to cut it off there because I want to have a few minutes for Q&A. Thank you very much. I can repeat your question if you just want to stand up and ask it loudly to make things go quickly.
We've got microphones. I'll start off with a question.
Okay.
30 years ago, you introduced us to some back doors that have since become a bit more popular. Just between you and a few friends, do you have any new favorite back doors in your back pocket?
That's been my challenge, is I find these fragile, little, beautiful, undiscovered places, and then with all my energy, I destroy them by sending everybody there. That's a challenge, and that now there's not that many undiscovered little villages that are that magic, but I still enjoy going back to my favorites that I was talking about at the UW Experimental College back in the 70s even. For me, the big news is second cities. We all go to Paris, we don't go to Marseille. We all go to Berlin, we don't go to Hamburg. We go to Edinburgh, we don't go to Glasgow. We go to Madrid, we don't go to Bilbao. We go to Brussels or Amsterdam, but we don't go to Antwerp. Think of the second cities, the Tacomas, all right? These are kind of Rust Belt places that have leaped into the forefront, and now they're energized, they're creative, they're edgy, they're quality, they're less expensive, and they're very rewarding. So I'm into second cities these days.
Next question over here. Rick, David Woodward, I haven't been in Iran since 1968, and you didn't mention taking a tour there yet. My sister went last year and had a fabulous time. When are you thinking of taking the first tour route to Iran?
I'm really committed to staying where I'm an expert, and that's Europe, and not overreaching. But I'm very also committed to helping Americans go to Iran. And my understanding is there's a lot of little American companies that say they do tours to Iran, but what they're doing is they're hiring Iranian companies, and they just partner that way, because that's the only way to get a visa. And on my webs at ricksteves.com, if you go to the Iran section, I've got a landing page with all the local companies that do these tours. And in the years since we did this show on public television, I've had so many people inspired to go to Iran come back, and they were very thankful for that opportunity. Not to endorse what their government's doing or anything like that, just to humanize that country. And if you want, there's nothing dangerous about any of these places. I'm not a foolish risk taker. I was scheduled to go to Egypt last October, and I canceled it because I figured it was not safe enough. But these places, I felt safe. I really did. And they're just places that a lot of Americans don't think we're supposed to go to.
Rick, quick question. Are you literally evolving away from Europe or expanding your brand? It seems like you are, but not officially.
Right. No, I'm not evolving away from Europe at all. Every year for the last 30 years, I've spent 4 months in Europe. I'm doing that starting April 3rd, the day after I give my talk on Cuba up in Edmonds. I spend April and May in the Mediterranean. I go home in June, and then July and August north of the Alps. I've got 30 guidebooks out there, the best-selling guidebooks in the United States for each country in Europe. Our business cards say Rick Steves Europe. I'd have to change all of those. I'm just so proud of what we do for what I consider the wading pool for world exploration. Now, if I get a chance to side trip out, I do it, frankly, for political purposes. I think America needs to open up to the rest of the world and not be so threatened by people who see things differently. And as a travel writer and a guy who likes to talk, and I've got a TV show and a radio show, I can sort of challenge Americans to get out. But I'm going to the Holy Land and Egypt and Iran and Russia, and I doubt if I'll go to Cuba with the TV crew, but I could. But that doesn't mean I'm steering away from Europe. I'm more committed to Europe than ever. I'm just all excited about getting Americans to take one step beyond Orlando. That's all I ask. Okay, one more question, yeah.
I wanted to ask about your carry-on bags that you put on the airplanes. We bought a couple from your office up in Edmonds some years ago, but they keep changing the dimensions in Europe as to what they'll allow.
Yeah.
I know you used to only want carry-ons, no big check bags.
Right.
How do you do it with the smaller bags?
You know, that's a good question. They fine-tune the carry-on restrictions, but I don't bog down on all those hair-splitting details. I've had the same bag for 5 or 6 years, and it's the same dimensions as I've had for the last 20 years, 9 by 22 by 14 inches. I live out of this bag. That's a whole hour-long lecture is packing beyond today's talk, but I am giving my 2-hour How to Travel talk for free on April 2nd, and I do deal with that. But I wouldn't worry about that. The main thing is just to get a bag that's 9 by 22 by 14, and if you can manage that, you're doing yourself a huge favor by being mobile. I was in 6 cities in the last 7 days, going around the country doing pledge talks for public television. Took an airplane ride every day. I never checked my bags, and it goes really smooth for me. As I mentioned, we took 20,000 people on our tours last year alone. None of them were allowed to take any more than one of those carry-in-the-airplane-sized bags. It's tough love, and we managed. And you know, they were glad they did. You'll never meet anybody who after 5 trips brags, every year I pack heavier. Now, I know I don't have any credibility among women when it comes to packing light, so I've got a lot of women guides and employees, and Sarah Murdoch, who's one of our best guides, has a 1-hour talk that you can watch for free on our website about women packing light and smart. 2 weeks, 2 months, man, woman, winter, summer, rich, poor, north, south, doesn't matter. You need to be mobile, and I'm sticking with that. Thanks for the question. Okay, hey, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you also for the inspirational work that the Rotary Club does in the interest of opening up to the world and exposing young people to the rest of the world and working with other clubs around the world. It's just a beautiful thing that you guys do. Thanks so much for having me here, and happy travels.
I chose not to study abroad in college. I didn't want to miss out on anything. To make up for that unfortunate decision, within days of graduation, I set out with a backpack and a Euro pass, and likely one of Rick's books. That whirlwind introduction to Europe stirred my enduring intrigue for journeys outside our country code. Travel teaches us to be part of the moment. Newness demands our attention. Along with music, John Iverson brought contagious joy and kindness to this club. It is congruent that he left this world while engaging life in full stride. We have been gifted this moment with no future guarantee, not to cling to in fear, but to savor in gratitude. See you next week.